Hi there, Mike Chan here of Lumiere 360 Anti-Aging TV. Today, I want to show you how you can finally achieve your ideal body composition by focusing on waist loss rather than weight loss. Now, as we have seen from previous biggest loser winner studies, losing weight the wrong way can actually cause permanent damage to your metabolism. And what I want to propose to you is that by losing weight the correct way, which is focusing on central adiposity or weight around your midsection, you can not only lose weight effortlessly, you can also keep the weight off permanently. And before I get into that, I want to share with you the story of a very recent client. I'm not going to name him, but I'm going to call him R. R came to me a little over a month ago because his wife made him. He was only in his mid to late 30s. But he has ballooned to over 200 pounds. He has successfully lost weight in the past following a fad diet, which in my opinion was unsustainable and unrealistic. And he came to me because he gained all the weight back as soon as he went off the fad diet. So now what we have done is we have shifted him into a real food diet, providing him correct foods provided by nature in the correct ratios provided by nature, and I have instructed him to focus on waist loss. And as a result, he has lost over 22 pounds in a little over 30 days, and he is continuing to eat that way, and to date he has lost another 10 pounds. And what I want to do is let R tell you in his own words what his experiences are. And so I hope that after listening to him, you would listen to what I have to say with an open mind. Here's his story.
Hi, I met Mike by chance. My wife, MJ, had an appointment with his wife, Alisa. We had a talk while MJ and Alisa is having their conversation, and we talk about nutrition, calories, protein, carbohydrate, exercise, and I found out that he is a nutritionist. So before the end of the conversation, I was convinced to enroll in this program. The first few days is very tough. It's hard. My body's adjusting from the program. But after you see the result, you will be committed to finish the program. And look what it got me. After 30 days in the program, I lost 22 pounds, but I gained muscles. I am happy now. I don't crave for the food that I used to eat before. I like the food that is being delivered by Mike and his group, and that I'm looking forward to a healthier me and achieving my goal for my family. And to Mike, thank you very much, and more power to your program.
Thank you so much, R, for letting me share your story. The reason why I chose his story over other success stories that we have in the past is because not only does R have the willpower to see the whole program through, but he also has the intelligence to understand that once you cause damage, once you cause a hormonal imbalance, which I'm going to be explaining later on, to your body, then weight gain is almost inevitable. But once you rebalance these hormones, as I'm going to show you how, the results come effortlessly. They come effortlessly and they are permanent. Why? Because it is never in the nature of the human animal to be obese. So thank you so much once again, Ron. Now, first I want to talk to you about how or why we get fat, right? In order to understand weight gain, you have to understand how the body works physiologically. The body has several hormones that influence the storage of excess energy and the breakdown of that excess energy during times when we don't have enough food so that we can keep on functioning. Remember that the human body needs energy 24/7, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and there's no getting around it. There is a form of currency that we use called ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, that is used for all cellular functions, and the body cannot store this. We only have about 6 to 20 seconds worth at any given time. So once the body stops producing this, you're dead in about 6 to 20 seconds. And This is why the body has a constant need for food. But we can't be eating all the time. That is neither practical nor is it sustainable. So what the body does is it has designed a system in which we can store energy through insulin and release energy through glucagon. And I'm going to explain to you what the insulin-glucagon ratio is. Insulin is an anabolic hormone. It is a storage hormone. It makes things grow. So whenever you eat foods and you don't use all the fats and the glucose or the fats and carbohydrates that you take in, anything that is excess that the muscle and the liver and the other organs do not immediately use will be stored as fat. And this is the hormone responsible for doing that. It's the hormone called insulin. So you release insulin to store energy, and it is an anabolic hormone. It makes things grow, right? Now, on the flip side, if, let's say, for example, the following day you don't get enough food to eat and you're running low, glucagon will now make an appearance. Insulin will drop, glucagon will make an appearance, and it is the job of glucagon to break down that fat, break down the stored fat to release energy. So that's what you're going to be using for food when there is nothing to eat. Because remember, evolutionarily, we weren't eating 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 times a day. There will be periods of time where we will actually be not eating because there's no game to hunt, or depending on the season, there will be no plants to eat. So this is a very, very essential mechanism that the body has built in order to allow us to survive. Now, homeostasis is a state of equilibrium. This means that when you're in homeostasis, you are neither gaining weight nor losing weight. And the body is always trying to achieve this. It's trying to find an ideal body composition for you and then keep you there. Now, when you are in homeostasis, again, when you're not losing or gaining weight, this insulin to glucagon ratio is very, very finely balanced. When you're eating, it's supposed to store excess energy. And when you are not eating, it's supposed to break down fat and release it as energy. Now, I want to talk to you about something called seasonal obesity. I'm going to transfer this here so you can see. Now, seasonal obesity and famine reaction, these are survival mechanisms, right? So, like I said, during times of our evolution, particularly during the Ice Age, some 2.5 million years ago, there were long winters, very, very short summers. So there would be times when food will be very, very scarce. And much like a bear can put on a lot of body fat in preparation for hibernation, so too can the human animal put on fat. This is called seasonal obesity. And this is triggered in the presence of certain foods. During summer, you have a lot of fruits, you have a lot of plants that give you carbohydrates, and you have a lot of animals that can give you fat. So if you combine these two foods, carbohydrates and fats, it triggers a response in your body called physiologic insulin resistance. Now, the body begins to develop physiologic insulin resistance. What this means is physiologic is it is a normal response to a stressor or a stimulus, right? Normal response. The body makes itself insulin resistant. What does this mean? If you take any stimulus or any stimuli, whether it be coffee, for example, or drugs. When you take in coffee the first time, you get a burst of adrenaline. And when you take drugs, you get high. This is the feeling that addicts try to go after. What you will notice, or what they would probably notice, is that the more coffee you take, the less the response. And this is because the body is actually building a resistance. The body is defending itself against overstimulation by making itself resistant to the effect of the stimuli. For example, coffee, you need to drink more coffee. The longer you're taking it, the more and more you need to drink in order to get the same adrenaline spike. And the same is true with recreational drugs. If you start taking drugs, you get a big high, and the more you take them, the response is dampened, so you need to take more and more of the drugs to get the same effect. This is called the resistance. Now, in regards to physiologic insulin resistance, the body actually makes itself resistant to the fat storage hormone so that your body will produce more. I hope this makes sense, because the more insulin you produce, the more fat you're going to store. Now, seasonal obesity or famines were never meant to last. You stored the fat for the winter, and once the winter was over or the famine was over, two things would happen. Either you would survive or you would come out of it very, very lean because you have used up all the body fat that you have built prior to winter or the famine, right? It's meant to be cyclical. It is a survival mechanism. Now, the problem is in our modern society where refined processed carbohydrates and refined processed carbs or fats are readily available 24/7, right? This physiologic insulin resistance turns into pathologic insulin resistance. And what that means is now, instead of it being a normal response to a stressor or a stimuli, the response becomes pathologic or abnormal. Now, whereas the body could dampen insulin once the winter season came, the production of insulin now becomes chronically elevated because your body is trying to produce more and more to try to store more and more of the fats and carbohydrates that you're eating. And this is essentially what is happening to people who are living in modern Western societies or modern developing and developed nations. And this pathological insulin resistance is really the branch point for a condition that I call premature aging syndrome. Now, premature aging syndrome is the early development of wrinkles, sagging of the skin, and discoloration, but it is much, much more serious than that. In medical terms, they call pathologic insulin resistance, they have a term for it, and it's called metabolic syndrome. And this is what metabolic syndrome is. Right, now I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say next, because this could literally mean the difference between life and death for you or somebody that is near and dear to your heart. I'm going to be talking about metabolic syndrome. Metabolic syndrome is basically when you have broken your metabolism or your ability to take in food and convert it into energy. When you have metabolic syndrome, you are essentially taking in food, and instead of releasing it as energy, you are trying to convert all that energy into fat. You're trying to store all the energy, and that creates a lot of hormonal imbalances in your body. And metabolic syndrome is actually your gateway to all chronic diseases, chronic progressive non-communicable diseases like heart disease, diabetes, stroke, cancer, and neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and so on. Now, I like to think of metabolic syndrome as a very devious mastermind to a crime syndicate. This metabolic syndrome is responsible for all of these progressive diseases. And I'm not just talking about progressive diseases, but ordinary human conditions like hypertension, GERD or gastroesophageal reflux disease, and PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. Metabolic syndrome or insulin resistance has a hand in all of these, but we never really look at metabolic syndrome. Nobody knows about metabolic syndrome. If I ask you what it is, chances are you wouldn't be able to tell me. We're all looking at heart disease, we're all looking at diabetes, stroke, cancer, and nobody is looking at metabolic syndrome. But what I want to propose to you is this: get rid of metabolic syndrome. You get rid of all of these or most of these diseases, right? And how can you tell if you already have metabolic syndrome? I want you to understand that a recent study that just came out found that in the United States, 88% of their population are metabolically dysfunctional. 88%. And since the Philippines basically follows US lifestyle, right? We're getting most of our energy from processed carbohydrates. Over 50%, 60% sometimes comes from dietary carbohydrates, very little from fat, very little from protein. And it's now no surprise that the Philippines is one of the top-ranked countries in Asia when it comes to diabetes, right? So how do you know if you have metabolic syndrome? You can actually test. And you can test this by checking for your blood pressure. If your blood pressure is elevated or if you have hypertension, that is already a good sign that you have metabolic syndrome. Number two is elevated blood sugars. So if your blood sugars are over 100, fasting, right? Between 100 to 125, you're considered pre-diabetic. Between 126 upwards, you are considered diabetic. But what I want to tell you is that if you go anywhere near those values, you are already diabetic and you don't even know about it, right? Another condition is called HDL or low HDL. HDL is your high density lipoprotein or your good cholesterol. If you have metabolic syndrome, this number drops or your good cholesterol goes down. And your triglycerides, which are the fats circulating in your blood, begin to go up, right? So fats are supposed to be inside cells where they're being broken down and used for energy, not circulating in the blood because they have nowhere to go. But what is the number one characteristic that you can tell if you have metabolic syndrome? That is central adiposity or weight around your midsection. That's right. If you're beginning to get fat in the midsection and you combine that with one or more of these other syndromes, then congratulations, you have metabolic syndrome and you are not only aging prematurely, but you are pushing yourself closer to disease. And this is how it happens. So as insulin resistance becomes pathologic, you begin to put on a lot of weight. And when this happens, you begin to generate lipogenesis or new fat formation in the viscera. The viscera is the area outside your internal organs and inside the abdominal cavity, or it's inside your abdominal muscles. When you generate this kind of fat, it's also called visceral fat or fatty liver or steatosis. You begin to release ceramides and a class of proteins called retinol binding protein 4. Now, ceramides are a type of fat and RBP4 is a type of protein that signals for more insulin resistance. It is trying to make your body more insulin resistant. Why? Because you're signaling your body that you need to store large amounts of fat. For a winter, remember, that never comes. And the longer this process goes on, the more your body is trying to pack on the fat, waiting for the winter. And this leads to even greater levels of insulin secretion, and this leads to more lipogenesis in the viscera. This leads to more formation of ceramides and RBP4. And this is a vicious continuing cycle. Which is why if you try to lose weight by simply reducing calories and you don't break this cycle, then you are fighting a losing battle because you will never be able to stop this process simply by reducing calories. Instead, what you should be focusing on is eating the right kinds of food, the foods that will not trigger insulin resistance. And what are those? High fat, high carbohydrates. If you eat in correct ratios that are provided for in nature, you automatically break this pattern and you restore metabolic health back. And trust me, this is actually a very reversible process, as you have seen with R. Now, I'm going to show you what you need to do in order to reverse this process and keep the weight off once and for all. Right, so there are many strategies I use to lower insulin resistance. And I want you to take a look at these 5 strategies that I believe will work wonders for most of the people who are trying to restore metabolic health. Number 1 is to consider ketogenic ratios. If you've never heard of what a ketogenic diet is, it's a very, very popular diet wherein the participants take in 70% of their dietary energy needs in the form of fat, 25% in the form of protein, and only 5% in the form of carbohydrates. So if you've never heard about it, please do go and research it. It might prove useful to you. Now, at the risk of offending those who are hardcore keto, I myself am not on a ketogenic diet. I believe that it's not necessary for long-term health. Why? Because our ancestors are not 100% ketotic. Having said that, I will say that it is good for humans to slip in and out of ketosis on a regular basis, which is what I do, right? You don't have to be eating strict ratios You don't have to be following a certain diet to be ketogenic. All ketosis really means is that you are breaking down enough fat to generate ketone bodies, particularly beta-hydroxybutyrate and acetoacetate and acetone, that your body can also use for energy. It's important to know that everybody is making ketones. It's just that when you're making elevated ketones through restricting carbohydrates or through fasting, then you are considered ketogenic or ketotic. It has nothing to do with one particular type of diet. Okay? Do I use it? Yes, I do use it. I use a lot of tools. Ketogenesis or ketotic diet is something that I use for specific clients. But once again, I transition them after. I don't put them on a ketogenic diet for life. Number 2, use protein-sparing modified fasts. What does this mean? It means that you limit the window, or you go for longer periods of time without eating. Why? Because insulin is generally triggered by eating specific kinds of foods, mostly carbohydrates. Sometimes amino acids, proteins can do this in the setting of insulin resistance. If you are already insulin resistant, I would not advise you to be eating high amounts of protein, because protein can be converted into glucose via a process called gluconeogenesis. Again, I won't dive deep into this, but in the absence of insulin resistance, protein is not a problem. But if you are metabolically deranged, then eating large amounts of carbohydrates and proteins can trigger sugar in your blood. So protein-sparing modified fast simply means you eat enough protein to make sure that your body does not catabolize muscle, because this is very, very important, and I'll tell you in a bit. I'll tell you why in a bit. But eat enough protein, and then try to fast. What I do for some of my clients is I put them on a intermittent fasts, right? I have them eat, I give them a 16 8-hour feeding window, which means that they can eat for 8 hours, but they have to be fasting for the rest of the time. So if I would typically give you your first meal at 11, you have 8 hours to eat your meals. So typically this would be, you'd be done eating by 7, and then from 7 onwards until 11 the next day, you will not be eating. Why? Because again, I want to lower insulin, and when you're not eating, you're not secreting as much insulin. That's the logic behind it. Number 3, move. I keep on telling people this. The reason why I want you to move is because what you may not realize is that up to 80% of your glucose uptake, or 80% of the carbohydrates that you eat, are taken in by skeletal muscle, right? It is the muscle that uses glucose and fats for fuel. So 80% of the sugars that you take in are taken by muscle in the form of glycogen. So now, here's the thing. The muscle cannot take in any more sugar if the muscles are full. If you are inactive, there's no reason for you to use glycogen, so you're just storing it there, and there's no room for more sugar to come in. So what I like to do is I have a very specific set of movements. You can check out my other videos on movement. I think the title is Move Like This in Order to Reverse Aging. I'm going to link that video on the show notes below. So if you're moving, particularly if you're moving right after your meals, I have you do a series of movements that will take 3 to 4 minutes after every meal. You are effectively emptying the glycogen, or the sugar stores in your muscle, and allowing more sugar to come in. If you're not moving and you still have stored glycogen, the sugars are going to pool in your blood. That's why you have high blood sugars. Number 4, eat only whole foods. What does this mean? Avoid processed foods at all cost. If it looks like food that nature provides, vegetables, meats, eggs, dairy, then if they're from good sources, feel free to eat them, right? Because if you eat them, I guarantee you, if you eat only whole foods, you're going to be eating mostly incorrect ratios. Because once you have become metabolically healthy once again, you have a system of hormones called the incretin system that triggers for hunger and satiety. when you eat only whole foods, your body will tell you when you have had enough through hormones like CCK, peptide YY, leptin, and ghrelin. I'm going to get into that in other videos, but I just want you to keep in mind that if you are eating only whole foods, that system, that perfect system that tells you when to eat and when to stop, that's going to come back. And the reason why I say that weight loss is effortless is because you're never hungry, as what you have heard from R. And lastly, what you eats matters. What does this mean? It is not just the food that you eat, but what they eat, because what they eat is basically what you're taking in, especially in the form of monogastric animals like chicken and pork, right? You have to understand that when you're eating these foods or eggs that are laid by grain-fed chickens, when you're eating these animals, you are eating a lot of linoleic acid, because that's what their fats are being converted into. And linoleic acid is a type of polyunsaturated fat that is inflammatory and can lead to the formation of more ceramides. Again, I don't have the time to get into that in this video, but if you are eating organic, grass-fed, naturally raised animals and pesticide-free plants, then you're going to be doing yourself a huge, huge favor. A lot of people say that health is wealth, but do you really believe that? Because if you really did believe that, then you're not going to be eating the toxins that are poisoning your body. Just because it says healthy on the label of any packaged item does not mean it's healthy, right? Keep that in mind. These food manufacturers, it's business, they want to make money, and in order to do that, they will have the cheapest ingredients and hire a team of researchers so that their foods are hyper palatable and addictive, and this is what you buy in the markets, right? So be very careful what you put in your body, and watch how your body transforms itself into the healthiest, best version that it has always meant to be. That is your birthright, right? I promise you that. So I hope you learned a lot from this episode. If you are interested in finding out more about our 360 anti-aging program, we actually have a meal program where we deliver to you organic, natural, whole foods that are handmade with no artificial ingredients every day by a world-class team of chefs and nutritionists. And I want you to see how eating this way can transform your life. If you're interested in learning more, visit us at www.lumiereskin&spa.com, or you can check out our social media pages, Lumiere Skin and Spa, on Facebook and Instagram. Always remember, if you're not aging deliberately, chances are you're not aging well. Until next time, this has been Mike Chan. To your looks and good health.